When I was a child, my dad left me homeless, at least according to my grandmother, whom I do believe in terms of this account. When my mother was confronted by my father's other wife about the fact that he was a bigamist, she was devastated. She had called her, and they met up at a diner, and she was determined to duke it out with my mom. The problem is, my mother, the minute she found out he had another family, mentally killed my dad. The problem is, he was still alive and still my dad. Just a few weeks before, my mother had discovered he was a severe cokehead, as she caught him snorting in their bathroom. The world erupted, and what was once the apartment of a young couple with a young baby and a bright future had become a sort of gravesite of furniture, confusion, and lies. My father immediately left, or rather, my mother kicked him out. At the time, my mother was very sick and would be for at least the next decade. My mother's health was always shattered or shattering. She's that person that you find out broke all their limbs, had three different forms of cancer, some super rare blood disorder that should hold a TLC special, and somehow looked fully functional and didn't mind an unlimited brunch. She had always, all her life, been sickly. And she loved that she didn't look sick because she feared people treating her differently. But I knew from living with her how tired and fragile she was, both physically and emotionally. My mother had gone through life on pure mental power, the belief that if she shut down certain thoughts and the people that triggered them, she could push her body and dampen feelings into some level of vibrancy. It's why she doesn't like tough conversations and can overly criticize but never handle criticism. At the time, she was desperate to find a new home and separate herself from the man that would become Mr. H, or rather Mr. Hurt, which you can hear all about also in my music. My father had promised to continue paying the rent as she moved, which and looked for a place, which surprises me that she believed him. He was a recipe for lies and dangerous ones, like the fact that he married her while being married to someone else. According to my grandmother, my mother, her, and my baby self went into the apartment to find all the furniture had gone. The landlord had taken it out and sold it because my father had not paid for rent or arranged for the furniture to be removed. We were homeless. But according to my mother, it wasn't my dad that failed her. It was that the landlord was suddenly a jerk. My grandmother rolls her eyes whenever my mom defends my dad, which she has a tendency to do, but so does my mother. They both defend either the people they like or the people they think they need to defend to continue liking themselves. My mother always defends my father because in her head she's defending her intelligence and trying to somehow prove that the man who played her into debt and devastation did not do so because her mind was weak or her body was dumb or because her mind was dumb or her body was weak. I never saw it like that, and it makes me feel bad that my mother does. I try to be accountable for my past and take back my power to make firm decisions and not just reactionary choices. I don't see my mother as dumb or fooled. I genuinely see my mother as naive and loving to a man so salacious, so scandalous, and devilish. You understand why he was a hoe. That's my worst fear. It's not about becoming my dad as much as becoming my mom. Someone in so much pain that to acknowledge how they at times, even accidentally, played a part in their own demise, they refuse to get wise. All right, let's discuss. So, when I was 2 or 3 years old, that's when everything erupted in terms of my mother finding out that my father had another family. She received a call from my father's other wife. They met at a diner. And my father's other wife is notoriously mean. Like, he doesn't have any real connection with any family members, never did. They were always fighting with his family. She kind of isolated him a lot, but it's also like, please do. Put that man in a cubicle, put him in a fortress, get him away. No one wants that. And she was known for being really, really, really mean. And she confronted my mother and said, well, he's got to choose. And I'm ready to fight for him. And I was like, oh, you don't know who my mom is. My mom, the minute you said all this stuff, she killed him. Mentally, he died. Problem is, he's my dad. And that's where I always felt my mother might have carried some quiet resentment towards me, or maybe that's why she was so harsh and critical over me. I was part this guy that ruined her life and would keep ruining her life. Like she never could fully get rid of him because he was my dad. But what our wedge was is that I wanted to get rid of him because he was my abuser. And I think my mother's concept of her own relationship with her father, who also abandoned her, really made her kind of go on overdrive to keep this guy who was by all means a loser. Anyway, so my mother finds out, and just a few weeks before she found out he was a cokehead, she walked into the bathroom. He was snorting away, and you know someone's bad if they're snorting away with their wife and their baby, their young little baby. And she was pissed about that, but she was ready to get him into rehab, and that's when my father's other wife called. Um, and my father said, you know what, I've always handled the rent, I've always paid, which I'm sure must have left his other wife in resentment because he had not been paying electricity and water and for their home. He was just visiting, which is something he would do to us too. When he felt emotionally and mentally shut down from someone, he didn't give them any finances. And he never gave me finances because my father was very materialistic. You're not a hoe and snorting half the earth if you're not some type of flesh and blood, very carnal character. And um, he promised, I'm going to keep on paying the rent. I'm so sorry. I hurt you. I'm so devastated. I'm so ashamed. You take your time. You find a new place. I got this. My mother comes back into the house with me and my grandmother, who was with her because my mother was so physically sick. She had a horrible birthing experience with me because you know how I am. I just dry people up. Um, why did I say that? Anyway, my mother was always a very sickly person. She got pregnant with me and she got preeclampsia. She had an embolism. She had like all this, everything that could go wrong in a pregnancy went wrong with her pregnancy, which is why I'm her only child. Um, and my grandmother, my mother, and my baby self walk into the house, the apartment, and it's completely empty. My mother panics, calls my father, who doesn't pick up, because my father always, one of the things about my dad that's, by the time I was 3, he was like, the phone goes both ways. He was really waiting for me to call him. But my father will block you. He's the original, like, I will block you on Instagram. I will block you on text. I will block you on a phone after I've destroyed your life. Couldn't reach him, called the landlord. She was like, did I just get robbed by cleaners? Because the house was like squeaky, the apartment was squeaked clean. Um, and the landlord said, your husband hasn't been paying. He didn't remove the furniture, and I took it all out. And according to my grandmother, that's what happened. My mother says that the landlord was a jerk, that my father did pay, but I highly doubt that because of my father, who he was, and his history. Like, he was vindictive. He did not like that my mother's reaction was to leave him, which is kind of crazy because technically she didn't leave him. He was a hot, maniacal mess. But my father was the type of person, which is why he never fully connected with me. He didn't, what he wanted, he wanted. And if you didn't want what he wanted, he punished you in very quiet, sneaky ways. Because he was a coward. I mean, you don't become a bigamist and have families in different states and different countries and get married in Puerto Rico um, if you have and they don't know about each other, if you're somebody who's honest and courageous enough to be so. And I believed my grandmother's account, which is the one that I wrote which is the one that I just wrote, because my mother, she's definitely approving of Daddy Recovery, but she doesn't like to listen to it, and thank God, because My mother will defend my father, I see in perspective, because she sees it as defending her intelligence. Like one time we got into this huge fight because my father said, "Oh, I don't pay you child support because you're so rich." And my mother was like, and I thought I nearly threw myself out the window. I could not believe my father came in with a new car every time he visited me, a new watch, a new shirt. That's why I was so annoyed with him. He may have been an addict, but he always had cash. Okay? And if you know what I mean by that, you know what I mean. Somebody ain't tapping into the government. Anyway, and I know he did that and he did it to punish her. And I also know he knows how to play victim and does this little cry. Oh, I'm so sorry. But my father, for the next 25 years of my life, would write love letters to my mother all the time and would stalk her. Um, and when, like, we cut him off, and those love letters always became emblematic to me because he never mentioned me. He only mentioned her. And what was so crazy about it was this resentment he held towards her for not fighting for him, for not telling his other wife, let's duke it out. He stays with me. Mind you, she was sick, just found out he was a cokehead, and also a bigamist. Like, I don't know. What I always admired about my father was he was so self-pitying. He didn't see that he was a victim of his own choices, and thus he didn't have enough compassion or care for the people that were really victims of his choices, like my mother and like myself. And he always hated that feeling that he had that she let him go. And that had she said yes to him, in his mind, they would have fought against this woman because he was very scared of his other wife. He thought that she was cruel. He said she threatened him with jail all the time because she knew where his skeletons were in terms of his finances, in terms of his own scams and crimes. And Khan, meet your prison guard then. You know what I mean? He would say it as if he wanted pity. But the truth is, my compassion goes to my mom, and so does my kind of self-realization and why I do daddy recovery. My fear is not becoming my dad. My fear is becoming my mom. And realizing that I have focused and manifested too many relationships with people that were like my dad and had very similar reactions to my mom of just, oh, move on, let me be generous, let me give. Oh, they know what they did. Um, and my mother could be very harsh on me. And my fear, especially as a potential mom myself one day, is that I kind of get very brave with the wrong people. Like, she could be very harsh on me, very volcanic, but she wasn't that way with him, no matter how she frames it. And she was never that way with the people that most played her. She held back. And I don't want to be Mrs. Confrontational and just start flaming everybody's ass. But at the same time, I don't want to. Sorry, my dog is barking. I don't want to be so arrogant in a way, as sad as it is, and so scared to see that I participated in my own doom that I continue repeating the pattern and cycles that get me in really doomed situations. I think that my father, because he was such a shape shifting energy, and I have a podcast coming out about shapeshifters, he never grew. Like, he never became a better person. He just understood what looked better to someone, which is why he had so many masks and why I'm so hurt. I mean, he gave me the mask of evil. He was just evil towards me. And I just, I don't think my mother was played for stupid. I think my father was definitely attracted to her, obviously obsessed with her in terms of love letters and stalking. But I think that he played her in terms of both of them came from childhoods of mass poverty in Puerto Rico and had these really tricky relationships with their mothers and their father, abandonment issues. He knew what wounds to open to look like a man who was soft. My father was incredibly manipulative, and he always knew what lie to tell when the truth was convenient enough to escape from a lie he told. He understood what people needed to make himself what they wanted. And I don't think my mother is dumb for falling into his traps. I think you can get smarter without necessarily saying you were dumb. I have fallen into a lot of traps, and I've fallen into them because of my daddy issues, because of how my mother raised me to be a good girl, because of this patriarchal system, because of life, because of my own nature. And I really want to get better because I sometimes fear I've never been loved. Or at least I fear I've never been loved in the ways that I've needed, wanted, and deserved. I want a soft love. I want a generous love. I want a sweet love. I want a love that is peaceful. I love that in my household we laughed every day, but I cried a lot. There was a lot of yelling, and it could be rough. I want somebody who's not so messy, not chaotic, but adventurous. And those are the people I want to manifest. And if I want to get to them, I have to become a better person myself because they deserve a better version of me. So, yeah, subscribe and check out daddyrecovery.com.